The phrase ghost town conjures emptiness. Crumbling ruins, windswept streets, bygone moments frozen in time. Literal ghost towns, on the other hand, are anything but empty. Today, we're delving into stories of actual haunted places. Welcome to Shadowland, everybody.
Welcome.
This is a podcast that shines a spotlight on stories of the supernatural, mysterious, eerie, and unexplained. Stuff like UFOs,
Hallucinogens,
cryptids,
cults,
hauntings at sea,
miracles,
intuition,
quantum theory,
shadow people,
ghost trains,
elves,
sex magic,
Roswell,
Atlantis,
creepypasta,
Area 51.
all of that stuff
like
and
that,
more.
And more.
I'm Christina Callery.
And I'm Seth Jablon.
And today we are talking about ghost towns, the literal kind.
That's right, or haunted towns, ghost towns.
Haunted towns. And because it's October now, we're calling it Spooktober.
Yes, we're doing some Spooktober specials here.
Yes, we are. So we're actually going to be releasing one episode a week throughout the whole month.
Yep, hopefully.
Yes.
No, we will. But
we will.
It'll be spooky, it'll be sexy, it'll be weird, it'll be fun, so get ready.
Yes.
Cool. So we want to do a little news. I got some more news.
Yeah, I want to hear your news. Okay,
cool. Well, I don't have it like super prepared, but
it's okay.
Something I've been meaning to bring up on this podcast, and it was I guess about a year ago in September 2018. The FBI showed up at the Sunspot Observatory in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and shut it down. And it's remained shut down since. And they're not talking about why. They've given no explanation.
Whoa.
They just shut her down. They refuse to tell anybody what's going on. And basically they have like people standing guard, and that's that. Like there's no information about it. There's not much sort of observed what's going on there. Just like a bunch of people sitting around making sure no one gets up there. The employees don't know anything. Obviously, the internet's going crazy with all sorts of theories, right? Obviously, one would be aliens or something alien they don't want anyone to see, meteors, threatening space phenomena like that. Of course, there's definitely a HARP theory thrown in there. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's
I don't. What is that?
That's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It's a government research program that deals with experiments with trying to control the weather, or at least that's some of the theories around it. It's this crazy electronic telescope of some sort, or something that can send tons of electricity up into the upper atmosphere. It's a real thing, but
whoa.
There's obviously a lot of conspiracy theories about it and why it's there and what's the deal. But definitely that's some connection to that. But anyways, but yeah, that's it. I mean, that's basically the news. It's not only did they shut this thing down, but it's been a year and they're not talking about it.
That's really weird,
isn't it?
I have no idea. I mean, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, so if the FBI showing up, right? There's something very Man in Black about that. What does the FBI have to do with an observatory, right? When you think about what would be the scope of, it's not like Homeland Security, you know what I mean? It's not can you see some sort of satellite or something like that. So the fact that it's FBI is very strange.
Was it front for drug dealing or something?
That's a good.
I'm joking.
Idea. I don't know. I mean,
it's not a funny joke.
Yeah. Maybe space cocaine or something like that.
Space cocaine. Yeah.
I do some of that. But yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know, probably aliens. I mean, I'm not going to say it's aliens, but it's probably aliens, right?
Yeah, so I guess if
something they don't want us to see, something somebody doesn't want everybody else to see, for sure is up there, right?
yeah,
So that's a short list, I would imagine, of things
that's
that are up in the air,
super
up in the space.
super interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, so if you have an idea, send it to us. We want to hear it.
yeah. Or if you have any
Like
news
like
that you think we should mention on the show, send us that too.
cool.
Cool. Okay.
So,
So we're doing haunted towns. I've got a long one. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? What do you
you know
think? What
what?
do you feel?
I can go either way.
You can
Mine's
go
kind of long
either.
too.
Yours is
Yeah.
long too.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you go first?
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so mine isn't a town per se. It's an island. Um, but I don't know. I feel like it counts. So this is the story of Pavella. Pavella. I did look this up on the internet on how to pronounce it, and
Okay.
it's a small island, less than half a mile off the coast of Venice, and it has a
Venice,
very
Italy. It's like
yes,
oh, okay.
yes, Pavella.
Not Venice, Florida.
No,
That was
not
a
Venice,
joke. That was a
Florida.
bad joke, too.
Okay. So it has a very tragic, dark, and pretty horrifying history, and it's said by some to be the most haunted island in the world.
Whoa.
So basically, it was first settled in the year 421 by people who were, it was like during Roman times, people were fleeing from barbarian invaders. They went to this island, and because it was small, the inhabitants could defend it, but life was pretty hard because they faced multiple attempts of invasion on a regular basis, and they kind of had to fight a lot. So this island, they pretty much stayed there, for many years though, and they were able to live in this area. And then in 1793, the bubonic plague raged through Venice, and Pavia became a quarantine colony. And there were a number of other small islands that the Italian government used for this purpose at the time, and they were called lazarettos. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But basically, anyone who had symptoms of the plague was sent to one of these places to recover in isolation or not.
Just like recover or die, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Oh.
So, there were some reports of the island being used for the same purpose during the 1300s, but it's disputed because there was another wave of the Black Plague then. So at first, if patients recovered, they were free. They were free to go home. Like after a period of about 40 days. I didn't know this before, but the word for quarantine can be traced to the Italian 40 giorni. I apologize to Italian people everywhere, but it means 40 days.
That's like of the quarantine is 40 days.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, like as far as like a 40 day time span. So at first, it doesn't sound like things were too bad and people were able to go back home if they improved. Because not all of them had the plague. Sometimes they recovered. However, as the situation worsened and there were more and more cases of the plague, the conditions on the island grew worse. And eventually it became like a dumping ground for the diseased and decaying bodies. And horrifically, because people on the mainland were so terrified of catching the plague, some communities exiled anybody who showed signs of illness. And many of them didn't even have the plague. So, somebody's like coughing or whatever.
Right, like, get 'em
and,
outta here.
and it's like, get them out of here. Exactly. So they were sent against their will in a lot of cases. They're put on ships, and sometimes, and this is just, it's so horrible, but with like thousands of corpses that were being shipped there to be burned because they constructed these pyres in the center of the island where they would burn the bodies. So there was very little in the way of medical treatment there. There were plague doctors who had this special creepy garb. Maybe you've seen this. they wore these masks to try and avoid becoming infected.
Oh,
And
right. They're like those weird masks, right?
yes, yeah. So it's like the most famous part of their um, uniform was like long-nosed bird-like masks. So it looks like a super long like crow face, and then they had glass eye openings to cover the eyes, and then the beak part of it were stuffed with like herbs and straw and spices to try and decontaminate.
That's
Um,
so bizarre. I always wonder
isn't
what
it?
the big long nose was for.
I know. Can you imagine like being sick and then on top of that seeing
Like
these
someone looming
plague
over you.
doctors?
Like, oh shit.
Yeah. So these plague doctors also wore long overcoats made out of some kind of waxed fabric, and they carried canes so they could poke people and kind of like prod them or move them without making direct contact. So basically, they were like super creepy and disturbing. Um, so the patients were pretty much by that point doomed to live and die there, isolated from the mainland and the rest of human society. And proper graves weren't used, and instead, the bodies were burned. They were dumped in these huge common graves and pits. And this is really, really disturbing, but most horrifying of all, there were reports of people who were apparently weak but like burned alive because they were like tossed on this pile of corpses. So there's a lot of suffering and darkness in this island's history. And this is a crazy fact to me, but it's been estimated that up to 50% of the island's soil is composed of human ash.
Whoa.
Because it was used for this purpose, it's just like astounding. And so like even now, like charred bones are a regular find in the soil and washing up on shore. And local fishermen apparently sometimes avoid the surrounding waters because they don't want to be picking up bones in their nets.
Gross. I feel like there's something
It's
about like improper burials. That's like a theme in mine as well.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So as if this like grim history weren't enough, the island became another kind of quarantine later on in its history in 1922 when a mental asylum was opened on the island in an existing building. So this time the exiles were mental patients.
Jeez.
Yeah. Um, so tragically, because the island was so isolated, it enabled doctors to do whatever they wanted and in some cases basically abuse the patients. And there were stories of horrible mistreatment that started to spread back, in the mainland. And so the last incarnation of the island housed a geriatric center, and that closed in 1975. And since then, the island is abandoned and it has become overgrown with vegetation. It's supposedly off limits to visitors, but ghost hunters and other explorers still like pay people to take them over there by boat. And there's graffiti in the buildings. We'll post some pictures, but it's just very, very, very creepy looking there. And for the most part, nature is taking back over all the structures. So, as you might expect, there are a lot of ghost stories and legends that surround Pavea. And one of the most famous ones involves a doctor at the mental asylum who was straight up evil. He was supposedly the main doctor in charge, and he wanted to make a name for himself by discovering a cure for insanity. That's how the story goes. So
That
he
sounds like
started.
trouble right there.
Right, yeah, just like a blanket cure. So he started performing unwanted lobotomies and like weird experiments on his patients who were these helpless, isolated victims. Their families weren't there. They had no way of contacting the outside world. And he used crude instruments like hand drills and chisels, and it was unbelievable cruelty. And some of these patients died. In fact, a lot of them did.
I feel like some of these lobotomy doctors, like the one that went around America too, I think someday they'll be listed as serial killers because they were straight up
Seriously,
insane sociopath,
like
psychopath, whatever they were.
sadist. Yeah, the
Sadists. To
sadism
go
that you would.
around
Yeah,
maiming people's brains is like, it's unbelievably sick. And
Yeah.
yet they like put this guy's like his doctors, like that American one. He used to have like a sleeveless smock that he would wear, and then just
Ew.
like shove a pin in people's eye. It was horrible,
Oh,
but
it's disgusting.
yeah,
Yeah,
but there's
it's
yeah,
horrible.
there's something really like hell bent about that desire in these doctors.
Yeah. So it's said that he performed these experiments in an operating room beneath the clock chamber in the hospital's bell tower, which had very thick walls and like so you couldn't really hear the screams of the tortured patients, or you kind of could, but it was barely audible. And he kept on doing this for a while. And gradually, however, strange things began to happen on the asylum grounds. Patients started hearing things, including the wails of suffering spirits and seeing ghosts and apparitions. And some of them claimed that the spirits came to warn them that the doctor was an evil man.
Whoa.
Yeah, so maybe like the stuff he was doing wasn't known to everyone. So at first, these incidents weren't reported to staff because obviously patients didn't want to risk being diagnosed with more severe delusions
Right,
and
right, exactly.
subjected to worse. Yeah. So, they kept the stories to themselves. But, and the experiments are still being carried out by the doctor. And over time, though, the ghost sightings increased and all of this paranormal activity kind of stepped up to the point where, you you couldn't avoid it anymore. Like everyone was seeing these things, and it was happening all the time. And the staff and the doctor himself were hearing about these events, if not witnessing it themselves. So, as you might expect, this crazy doctor laughs it off at first until one night he experienced something himself. He encountered a ghost, and the story goes that after that, he was haunted and tormented by spirits of his victims at all hours of the day. Couldn't sleep, like day and night. They're haunting him. He's hearing voices and seeing things. He finally went mad and jumped from the tower to his death.
Oh my god, that sounds like an Edgar Allan Poe story. Holy
Yeah.
shit, that's
So
crazy.
yeah, they got their revenge. So
Yeah,
a
Revenge from the
nurse,
Grave. That's yeah.
right. So, but it gets weirder because a nurse on site claimed that he was still alive after impact, but a dark mist came up out of the ground and basically choked him to death.
What?
Yes.
Has anyone like
So,
done a movie about this or something?
no,
Like
I
something shit?
know. It's such a crazy, fascinating story. Um, so all told, there have been over 100,000 people were sent to this island of Pavia to die. And unsurprisingly, there have been many reports of hauntings and strange occurrences on the island since then. Just I'll touch on a couple right now. So even though the bell tower was removed decades ago, people have reported hearing chimes from the bell, even though it's no longer there. Several psychics recently got permission to visit the island, but they were so disturbed by what they picked up there that they left abruptly. A construction crew was brought in to try and restore the former hospital, and they just suddenly ceased work, left the island, gave no reason for why they were quitting the job and leaving, and they were unwilling to discuss what happened with anybody.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then reportedly, a wealthy man once bought the island. I think it was back in the 60s or something. He bought the island from the Italian government. He wanted to turn it into like a private family getaway. And his family is like, I mean, this sounds like something like a Vincent Price movie or something, but basically the family visited the island and decided to stay the night. Let's kind of like get the feel for what it's like being here. And the daughter was basically attacked and sustained a serious injury to her face when she was struck
What?
by a piece of flying masonry, which they said flew at her horizontally. So it wasn't something that
Like
dropped.
fell
It
off the
actually
building.
like
It's like
like it was
something
being
through it,
thrown.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Holy
So the
shit.
family left. They never returned. And then in 2016, 5 people from Colorado took a water taxi to spend the night on the island. They were dropped off and they were supposed to be picked up the next day. At some point during the night, they were haunted by a dark presence, and they became so terrified that they basically just like started screaming for help. And a sailboat in the area had to call authorities, who sent the Italian firefighters to rescue them. And they got out of there. And that is the story of the island of Pavia,
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
isn't
How
it?
long is that all taking place? Like over like two or 300 years or something?
Oh, longer. I
Longer
mean, like,
for
yeah, I mean,
what
like,
did it?
basically, the first settlers were in
Oh,
421.
okay. Wow, it's like
Yeah, so.
700 years or something like that. Whatever. I don't do math. But yeah, it was for a long
It's like a little,
time. Something like that.
it's a little more
Between,
than.
yeah. Yeah, that's crazy though. Like, so you can go there to this day? Like, you can get on
Well, you're
there?
not
You're not
supposed to.
supposed to, but you can if you really
So
want to.
what I've, yeah, like, in doing research about this, like, it looks like it's off limits, but you can go to Italy and pay someone to take you over there in a boat. So I think we should do it.
Let's do it. I mean, like, I definitely like have the impulse to do stuff like that. Like, I don't know if I,
Yeah, me too.
actually would, but because that sounds straight up terrifying, and you're kind of asking for trouble, like, in lots of different ways just by doing that. But it does sound like sort of tempting. Um, wow, that's crazy. The dark mist like coming over him. That's something else. That's very like poetic or something.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
Cool. Well, that was good. Like I hadn't heard about that place. Now I want to know more. Um, all right. So shall we do my story?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. Cool. So my story is the story of Jerome, Arizona. Have you ever heard of Jerome, Arizona?
I have not.
Okay. Well, Jerome, it's a town in the Black Hills of Yavapai County in Arizona. And it sits up on this sort of mountain, on this part of a mountain called Cleopatra Hill, and it's far above the Verde Valley. It's about 40 minutes from Sedona. So originally, the area was populated by the Hohokam, who lived and farmed, in that area around Jerome from about 700 to 1125 BC. I think there was natives peoples there, long after that. I think all the way up until the sort of settlers came. So yeah, the valley below was actually a sacred valley, and I think there's a sort of string of sacred valleys that stretch, or maybe it's all one. I'm not really sure. That sort of stretch through the Verde Valley, where Sedona is, down to Montezuma. But I think at the time the settlers came there, I don't know if they were using it as a burial site. I can't exactly remember the whole story, but I definitely think there was some dirty dealings with the natives. When the settlers arrived, as there often is with stories like this. Um,
Right.
I don't exactly remember what happened, but something like that. But anyways, Jerome, nonetheless, was founded in 1876 as a mining town. They mined copper, gold, and silver there for actually quite a while. In 1890, it was populated with about 250 people, and then it grew to 2,500 by 1900, and its population peaked in the 20s around 15,000, making it at one point the fourth largest city in Arizona. And so that's kind of remarkable just because of, it's literally on top of this mountain. It's not very big. I guess it was a little bit more sprawling back in the day, where they actually had like little shanties that sort of sprawled all the way down the mountainside. Um, but anyways, that's just all sort of for context. So some of this is from research that I did, and some of this is from stories I got actually from locals there when I visited. So some of this is definitely uncorroborated, but I think it has value as like it's part of the lore, the local lore of that town from its inhabitants. So I did the best I could. So around the turn of the century, this was a really dirty place to be, right? At one point, it was dubbed the wickedest town in the West, right? Which is that's a pretty weighty designation, right? I mean, I guess when you think of the
Yeah.
West, you think more like, I don't know, mid 1800s, but it's definitely still the West. I think around that time, right? It's still largely unregulated, just like lots of wildness happening out there. But I think the town was around 80% men, mostly miners, and there was hardly enough space for people to live. So they would actually, some of these miners would actually share beds. When one miner would come home from a shift, the other would get up and go to work. That's how packed this space was,
Mm.
and I'm imagining that these were not these beds were pretty minimal, and they were in like little shacks and stuff like that. So they were living pretty hard. Um, so in addition to that, the mine was pretty big. Miles. It's well over a mile down, and probably much more than that. Um, Miles sort of stretching through the mountainside, and it was built very fast and often cheaply. Right, like back in that day, people were cheap, and they would cut corners, and so as a result, tunnels would collapse on a regular basis. So there would be deaths in the mine week on a weekly basis. Moreover, it was a town of surly old timey miners, right? Of every creed. They came from around the world to try their luck there to work in the mines, and so there was rampant gambling, prostitution, and other such things that certainly caused a lot of friction there. So there were fatal gunfights and brawls multiple times a week. So there was people dying there all the time. Like I kind of imagine this place sort of like Deadwood, but even worse. It was like bigger. There
Yeah.
was more going on. There was more people. There was money there, right, because of the mine. So just a lot of stuff going on. Uh,
And what kind
uh,
of mines were they?
it was silver, copper, and gold. So they were
Okay.
mining a lot. I think at one point it was one of the largest mines in America. Um, it was a real happening place. And additionally, there was an influenza outbreak at one point, which killed a large portion of the town. Right, and so that's a lot of people died there. I don't know. I don't think they have an exact number there, but probably tens of thousands of people died. Now, if you visit there today, you'll notice that the cemetery is actually quite small, right? Even for the size of the town, it's very small. It's just on this little hillside. I don't remember how many people were buried there, but it was like a few hundred, right?
You've been
So
there?
yes, yeah, I actually visited it. So I went on like a ghost tour, walked around, like visit some of these
Uh,
parts, and I'll come back to that. Um, but yeah, so yeah, very small cemetery. So, basically that means they did not bury a lot of these people that died there properly, right? We don't know exactly how they were buried, but a number of them, so it said, were the bodies were just simply just thrown on the back of this old slag pile on Cleopatra Hill, right? Which is like where all the rocks they would sort of mine when they were sort of mining, they would have to remove material, right, to like make tunnels and things like that, and they would throw it down the back side of this uh, mountain, and they would just start throwing bodies there at one point. So, pretty nasty business. But basically, at the center of this town was this massive brothel, and it was said to be run by this legendary madam from New Orleans. There's a ton of stories about that, such as like secret entrances for just the men. Uh, and one of the salient stories about them is that they had a number of massive fires that burned the entire town down. Um, I think several times over. And in one of the cases, the madam actually told everyone she would give them free credit for life if they saved the building. So it was the only one that still stood after the fire. And so around that time, all the town was built mostly of these wooden shanty structures, probably, pretty haphazardly. I highly doubt there was much regulation at that point. They just made stuff, people lived in it, burned down, they made it again. So I think after this fire, the mayor finally decreed that all the new structures would be made out of masonry and cement, basically. So they had started a cement plant. Someone had started a cement plant down in the valley. I don't know if it was part of this, but or just sort of after, but it was probably for the mine in some way. But now it went into like big time production, making all the cement that would be used in the rebuilding of the town. So now don't know if you know how cement works, but basically like it's like crushed up rock, and one of the largest supplies of rock to crush up was all the slag that was left on the backside of Cleopatra Hill. So I don't know
Hmm.
if you remember, that's where they threw all the
Bodies.
bodies. Right?
Oh boy.
So basically, they just ground up the remains with all the rock, and essentially rebuilt Jerome out of the bones of the dead. Right? Pretty
Mm,
creepy. So
that's
no wonder
very
this place
creepy.
is fucking haunted. Right? So so there's a lot of ghost stories that pervade the town. All right, too many to tell all in one sitting, but just to give a few. Um, in the center of the town, there's what they call the sliding jail. It started sliding down the hill after some mining blasts, right? Like they're under there, like blowing stuff up, and it just sort of shook this building so that it sort of like slowly slid down the hill.
Did
Um,
anybody get out?
well, no, I mean I think this is the course of like quite a bit of time,
Okay.
so it would move like little by little. It may still be moving, I don't know, but it's like it's still there. They just let it go. I think eventually they stopped using it as a jail, but it's definitely a place of local activity, right? A lot of locals says they see shadow people walking around there, and I walk down there, and it's pretty terrifying. I mean, it's like it's hard to separate the sort of context and sort of what you've been told, and going in the middle of the night to this place that's supposedly haunted with shadow people, like, but it definitely was creepy. Like, it was definitely like, a creepy
Did you
area.
feel anything?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the whole town kind of has that feeling to it, right? There's certainly, I've definitely been places that people were like, oh, this is, haunted, and, you don't necessarily feel anything. Places like that where you feel, you can definitely feel like something bad's happened, right? So, anyways, definitely a creepy place. Now, also high up on top of the town, there's a massive and definitely haunted hotel called the Grand Hotel. It's supposed to be the most haunted part of the town. It's sometimes called Ghost City, right? There's like so
Hmm.
many ghosts there. It's like Ghost City. Um, it actually started as the United Verde Hospital, and it's believed that nearly 9,000 people died there at some time,
Whoa.
right? So I don't know if that was probably, I think some of that might have been part of that influenza outbreak, but, like hospitals in that, during that period in America, I think, some of them, like the one that you had, it's like people go there and a lot of people die, right? They didn't necessarily know how to take care of everybody. And it's just, a place, I think it was probably compounded by how many people ended up showing up there. But basically, it was afterwards then converted to a hotel. Now go see figures, sound, unexplained orbs of light. I think there's ghosts that walk the halls, and there's all sorts of other paranormal activity there on a nightly basis. Apparently, there's even a ghost cat that walks
A
around.
ghost cat?
Yeah, that's like supposed to like jump on people's bed, and like, like you can hear it like walking around. I thought that was pretty hilarious.
It is. What does it make noise, or is it just
I
like
guess
you
you
can
just
kind
sort
of
of
feel
hear
it?
it as if it were walking around. Sometimes like people hear footsteps of things, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But there's lots of creepy stories at the hotel, such as the caretaker who committed suicide in the boiler room. The maintenance man, Claude Harvey, was found in the basement, crushed by the elevator in 1935. Um, he's still thought to ride the elevator at all different hours. So, this thing has a storied past. It's been haunted for a very long time. I didn't go in there, just didn't have time. And, if I ever went back, I certainly would. But I did drive up to it and see it. And, yeah, it looks haunted. And then lastly, one of the places I did go was the high school. And again, talking to some locals, it's one of the places that people are like, have had the most experiences with in the town, right? I guess most of the town people aren't staying in the hotel, but everybody's been to the high school there. And so I obviously went there on a tour, but went down there. They have a theater in the back. It's very creepy. And then basically we went downstairs into the basement, and that
Ew.
was pretty terrifying. Like it was like, we sort of led through the rooms, and there was one room, the boiler room, where he's like, you can go in there, but people get scratched and pushed, and like definitely felt something weird there. I would say that's probably one of the places, including the place I was in Edinburgh, where you definitely felt something like not good you know. Again, hard to remove it from the context, but I've been in dark basements before. There's like,
Right.
what was the word you said last time? Nemesis?
Numinous?
Numinous. Definitely had some numinous. Anyways, now a portion of the school is still used by artists who rent out the old classrooms as artist studios. And so the artists are actually working there all the time. So when we went there, we went like into the dark, sort of unused part, which is where the sort of theater and basement and stuff is. But then there's these two hallways where, again, where artists are sort of working, and all the artists there have zip tied down all the lockers because they say they can't get anything done because they're just constantly opening and closing, right? So it's a pretty haunted place. And that's like oddly still in use, right? There's people in there working. They just kind of deal with it. They're just like, don't leave any doors open, don't leave any lockers, open, because the ghosts will just bang them open and shut all the time. But I just thought that was pretty funny. And it's weird when you see a whole like hallway full of like zip tied down, lockers. It's pretty like odd sight.
That's very crazy.
Yeah.
Did you take pictures?
I did actually. Yeah, I did. I think I took some in the basement.
One.
Yeah, we'll post those on the Instagram. But yeah, so I mean, there's people that live there now. That they like to call it a ghost town. I mean, there definitely was a period in the 50s where it was. I think there was only like really a handful of people that lived there. I think during the 60s and 70s, a bunch of like hippies and artists discovered that it was like kind of abandoned, and so they all kind of moved in and sort of took over. And I think there was some law that said if some type of squatters' rights, or if they had lived there long enough, they could claim it. So now it's like it's got a bunch of artists that live there. It's definitely like some old mining town people from back in the day probably have some descendants living there. But yeah, it's a very interesting place.
It's probably some hippie ghosts even.
Yeah, definitely some hippie ghosts. So, yeah, probably some like real Scooby-Doo shit going on there. But, but yeah, that's the story of Jerome, Arizona.
Wow, that's super cool. I can't wait to see the pictures.
Yeah, I forgot that. I think my wife actually took a couple that were pretty great, pretty scary. Just like graffiti down there, just feels like dark, But yeah, pretty cool, pretty scary.
Super cool. Yeah, it's really spooky.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting how these places can take on a sort of like, life of their own. Like, they can have these stories. They can have, they can become haunted outside of like a structure. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah. Which kind of, begs the question, is it actually spiritual entities of individuals causing this, or is it something else going on?
Yeah, right. Is there some weird geological thing? Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, and like we have an episode coming up that might cover some different types of phenomena, and I think there is something to that, right? Like I think places can have different energies, and I think I mean, we know that magnetically speaking, we know that geologically speaking, so why wouldn't that extend to some types of phenomena that we don't know? But I also think that like places can absorb like, human activity, and especially when it's like, suffering involved, right? Like that can be absorbed. So.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense too, because like you always hear the stories of the ghost that like, every night at midnight he walks up the stairs and turns on the light. And, honestly, if you're this, you're unencumbered by a physical body, you're in the afterlife, you're a ghost, you can like jet around, you can go to freaking like Saturn, whatever, we're just assuming here, but like, you're disembodied. Why would you hang out and do the same thing all the time?
I mean, that's a great question.
Always been my question, because it almost makes it seem like they're lobotomized, like if there is like some spiritual, consciousness there. And, so.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think there is something about them being caught in a loop. Some people not wanting to let go, like
Mm-hmm.
there could be
Mm-hmm.
something in that. And then we also think, when we think of ghosts, we think of them as like conscious entities. And I think if
Mm-hmm.
they do exist, there's definitely some room for discussion around like whether or not they're actually like self-aware in any sort of way, right? So you're thinking like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that they have some sort of will, whereas maybe there's some type of echo, right?
Right.
So, anyways, but yeah, let's get into that. I mean, I think, when we do that episode about the different types of phenomena, I think that would be like a cool point of discussion.
Yeah. 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 Cool.
Cool. Well, that was a lot. That was like both our stories. I feel like were pretty weighty and had a lot in them.
Yeah, and spooky.
Very spooky. Yeah,
Very,
two very spooky
very
places.
spooky.
Um, cool. And so we have some more spooky stuff coming up. We've got some
And spooky, sexy stuff coming up
spooky,
too.
sexy stuff, spooky, fun stuff, and more spooky, spooky stuff. So it's going to be a spooky month, a spooky October.
Oh, we should also thank the Tims.
Oh yes, yes,
So Tim Kelly is our phenomenal editor who's been helping us with this.
yes. And Tim Lincoln did the music, and I think we'll probably end up rolling some credits into our outro or something. But yeah, we wanted to mention them as a part of the team for Shadowland.
Yes, thank you, Tims.
Cool. Okay. So I feel pretty good about this episode. Do you?
I do too. Yeah, yeah, I think we're pretty good.
Great. All right. Well, until next time.
All right, see you later.
Bye.
Bye.